Well, good morning and welcome to this video. Um, it's a part of our awakening, a part of the great awakening that is taking place now across the world. And I should say, put a timestamp on this, since we do still seem to find ourselves in time, processing through the transformation of our minds in the awakening to timelessness. But this is the year 2021. It's Christmas Day. And I'm making this video because it's just come to my attention that I haven't made one discussing the nature of the world, and specifically as a platform wherein minds come to experience the results of their own thinking in their wish to make real to themselves the idea that there is a possibility they could be separate from Source, separate from God. So in that, one of the things that presents itself in the world on the physical plane is always the idea of death. It underlies everything. All things here come to die, from tiny little insects to great big whales in the ocean, to human beings, to planets themselves. Everything within the physical framework has a beginning and an ending, the alpha and the omega, including the framework itself. So the purpose of salvation then could be seen to be the collapse of that framework. All right, the idea of the salvation of man to the glory of God, or through the glory of God, is a process whereby an individual mind chooses to join the conscious collective, the whole, which it is already actually a part of, but excludes itself from by its beliefs, by its maintenance of belief in the idea of separation, or the potential contained with it. And that potential shows up out in the world as physical situations that attract the attention and keep the focus tethered to the world, rather than the internal kingdom, which is the kingdom of heaven is within you. So salvation is a collapse of time, and each person, each entity, let's say each mind, embarking upon this journey, being given one of these physical vessels for the use of that journey, finds themselves in a world where they don't really know why they're here. There's like a great cloud of amnesia, and it's not until you begin to question your reality, begin to raise the nature of life itself to question, that the hope of salvation can begin to form part of the cosmetic nature at first of the stimuli that you become aware of. And that may occur initially through religion, or perhaps watching a video like this or anything. But eventually that cosmetic manifestation becomes something that takes on more of a integrity for wanting to be understood, and integrity because the highest goal the ego can attain, which is that part of the mind voting, constantly voting for the temporal and not the eternal, the highest level that the ego can attain is the spiritual one. And beyond that it cannot go, because it doesn't exist beyond that. It's simply an idea, or a manifestation of an idea as a belief in separation, occupying the space in the mind as some kind of guide through the badlands of time and space. But of course, there's no obligation for you to listen to that voice in here, that internal voice, because you are spirit. You have a connection with spirit, your higher mind, and you can begin to choose again to listen for that instead. Listen for a higher guidance and begin to learn how to tune into that. One of the things that is required, or one of the things that is an integral part of salvation, is the removal of blocks, to love's awareness within yourself. However that occurs, it's always going to be individual, because everybody's own particular details and association with time and space has a different story to tell, and is loaded emotionally in a different way. Some people have very deep, heartfelt emotions with regards to family and friends, and others lean more towards animals and nature, all these sorts of things. So your triggers, which reveal your blocks, are going to be very personal to you, and by necessity they have to be, because otherwise you wouldn't understand the nature of the experience you're having at all. So learning then that the experience you're having has a different purpose, has a new purpose that you can embark upon, is something that will allow you to make new decisions based on that new purpose in regards to how you respond and react to the particulars of the situations that keep showing up for you, so that you can collapse the time that those situations would ordinarily have taken, with you continuing to perpetuate the same kind of reactive stimuli, projecting out the meaning again and again and again onto those particular situations as if they were somehow your reality, and getting the results of that. And it's like just erasing a particular bad habit out of consciousness. And suddenly, instead of being concerned about everything, everyone, or the animals and things like that, you'll realize that you're now transcending that particular framework of engagement with your thought system, and those things will no longer show up to bother you. And that's what we call collapsing time. Unfortunately, time is always against you. Okay, so there is an urgency to salvation. There is a requirement to be about this as quickly as you can, so that you can firstly begin to see the changes occurring in your consciousness and out there, which will prove to you that the transformation and salvation is a true thing, bringing with it miracles and wonders and things that you won't be able to explain them, which is why they're miracles and wonders. And secondly, helping you to be of assistance in the greater awakening in a more consolidated way, where every interaction you have begins to take on an opportunity to express the certainty of your mind that something true is happening for you finally in time and space, and that you're learning what it is that your true purpose is actually bringing you, as a way of escaping the nature of reincarnation, or the nature of remanifestation in the physical realm again and again. Because energy, which is essentially, let's just call it that for a second, energy cannot be destroyed. You are energy, you are light, which we'll call energy for a second, as a way of being able to talk about it. You are energy, you are a being of light. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can never die. It can only be transformed into a different form of energy. So through the idea of the transformation of the mind, wherein the magnets are pushing themselves apart, now we're transforming the nature of our mind away from that separative frame of reference to one where unity and coming together to rekindle the awareness of the whole within us is something that actually is what we become witness to as we go along. So unfortunately, in the nature of time and space, if you're a student of A Course in Miracles, you'll be aware that Jesus says the world is old and tired and without hope. And what we're seeing in the world at the moment, not that I particularly want to give it a reference, but what we're seeing in the world at the moment is a world struggling, a human world struggling to come to terms with the dwindling resources and the burdening of a growing population and that sort of thing. And the idea then of a population reduction and everything is the way that the ego makes manifest a solution in order to be able to maintain its status quo, its control over the dominion of time and space, which, even though it already knows it has no hope of doing so, will do so continually until the end of its obvious tenure, to the detriment of everyone that comes here, and everyone that comes here to experience and begin their spiritual journey, or continue on in the spiritual journey that they may have embarked upon in their last incarnation. And so the idea then that time is always against you is something that I would encourage you to take to heart as perhaps a, what would you call it? A push to be more vigilant, a push to be more, and this is for myself also, like I'm not separate from anyone or anything. It's like I'm concerned that with the diminishment of time, that the maximum use that the world can be as a platform wherein minds can come to transform the nature of consciousness is coming to an end. And so what it is that we tend to think of life as this being born, going forth and going to the grave, and generations beyond us, is kind of a very superficial perspective of life as it is. And I'm not going to say that the opposite to life is death, because there isn't. It's another form of life. But in this world, that other form of life seems to be a temporary expedient to our purpose, if we recognize our purpose and if we adopt our purpose, especially as the purpose of salvation rather than the purpose of denial, which is what it is as the running program when you first come to the world and begin to question it, obviously, at some point. And you have free will to do that or not. So the urgency to be about our Father's business is something that should not be left as an aside. It should be the main function of our living and breathing throughout the day. The urgency to be about our Father's business not only sings to the beneficence of what it is that is being offered us as the miracle, but also to our ability to be able to represent it and pass that on through that representation, however we do that, whether that's through poetry or formal teaching or art, or just through being of assistance to somebody selflessly. All of these sorts of things, it doesn't really matter. But all things as a devotion, all things as an opportunity, or as a willingness to engage in the opportunity to collapse the time that the potential of time and space seems to hold out to us between when it is that we seem to find ourselves questioning reality and when it is we seem to imagine for ourselves our enlightenment or our salvation might be fulfilled in us, right? Which is only ever going to be now, in the here and the now, which brings me to the point of that idea of the relinquishment of time, not just the collapse of it, but the collapse of it through the relinquishment of the need for it in the achievement of attaining the goal of enlightenment now, right, or the goal of salvation now, which is the experiential reconnection with our creative source, which we call God, Allah, whatever you want to call it. Our divine Buddhahood, if you want to call it that. So the Christmas message, I guess, is one of encouragement, is one of don't drag your feet, is one of dust off your sandals and move on if you are not heard. Don't be concerned about what others do with your teachings. For those of you who are formal teachers out there, that I know many of you now have consciously chosen to be amongst the ministers of God like myself, and to represent to the best of our capacity the curriculum of A Course in Miracles, or the curriculum of whatever it is that we are offering as a modality for the retraining of the mind and the reinterpretation of the mechanisms of the mind that continually seem to serve us miscreatively or uncreatively or not creatively, based on the old running program, right, which we are now transiting from towards the new horizon, or the new event horizon, I should say, of our enlightenment through the process of salvation. So be about it. And love is what you're being about. It's not hard work, and it's not a burden, and it's not any of those things that the ego would have you try to convince you that it is, when you can understand that it is love that you are being about, because salvation is the reawakening of love's presence within yourself, and the recognition of that through the notion that all beings are equal and that all of us are beings of love, and joining in that divine communion where that's all we want. There's nothing in the world that I want other than the divinity that comes from joining in the communion of the sonship, or in the whole, so that we can together collapse this shit show of a time-space framework back into the nothingness that it seemed to spring from as an idea, which has now been actually healed through the resurrection, that we are individually and collectively now, as that one mind waking up, participating in. Okay, and when I say collectively, there isn't really a collective. It's not like a load of individuals coming together, but think of it more as the twinkling of the sun on a lake, on a still lake. And more of us are beginning to twinkle, but we are all that one lake already. We're all beginning to reflect the light of truth on the surface here where it's needed, which is actually born of a deeper conviction within ourselves, and that already knows and already values the truth, but is for some strange reason reluctant to let go of the temporal association of the denial of the truth, because it thinks it's going to be punished. You won't. You'll be welcomed home with open arms. Welcome home. I love you. You've done nothing wrong. No one is judged for a dream. Let's be about our Father's business, and together rise up in joy and happiness and peace, and have no concern for the particulars or the dictates of the world, and the maintenance or longevity of our bodies, or any of that sort of thing. This isn't our first body. It won't be our last, perhaps. And this isn't the first world that we've occupied, and it definitely won't be our last, perhaps, although I do know that time is short for this one. And we should make use of time, because that's the purpose that time has, is that we learn to use it constructively for our greater good, and for the purpose of the awakening of man unto God. Thank you. I love you. Peace and Merry Christmas.